Ladies and gentlemen, ladies and gentlemen, ladies and gentlemen, I ask that everyone please take a seat. Rabbi will be escorting the family in momentarily. Can everyone please take a seat? Rabbi will be escorting the family in momentarily. before we begin, if you have a cell phone, we kindly ask that you please place it on vibrate. And on behalf of the Bellows family, I want to thank all of you for taking the time to be here today for the memorial service. And it's my honor to introduce Rabbi Cohen and Cantor Mendelson, who will be officiating this afternoon's services. Thank you. Rabbi Cantor.
We are assembled this morning to pay a lasting tribute of love to the life, to the love of the Honorable Carole Kamin Bellows, who has passed into eternity. As I was thinking about Carole and her life, and what she meant to her family, to her community, to her friends, I was drawn to a story that comes to us from the Midrash, from the rabbinic imagination, about two friends who were accustomed to taking long walks together. And on one of those walks, they happened upon a harbor, and they were watching what was happening in the harbor. There was a ship, a cruise ship, that was about to set sail, and there was tremendous fanfare. There was music and shouting and streamers. And at the same time, there was another ship coming into port, and no such fanfare was available for this ship. There was no music, no shouting, no streamers. And one friend turned to the other and said, this is exactly the opposite of what should be happening. The ship that's about to set sail with all the celebration, we don't know whether it's going to encounter storms along the way and safely pass through them and make it back to port again. But the cause for celebration is this other ship, the ship that has safely made its journey, has navigated its storms, and has returned safely to port. And our rabbis tell us this is what is true of our lives as well. When a baby is born, of course, there is much celebration, as there should be. But at the end of a person's life, particularly a life that was lived so fully and so well as Carole's life was, is also an opportunity for us, even in the midst of our sadness and grief at her loss, to also celebrate the love, the caring, the devotion that she shared with her family, with her friends, with her community. There is a verse from the book of Deuteronomy. Tzedek, tzedek tirdof, justice, justice shalt thou pursue. And I believe that this would be Carole's motto as well. She was a true pursuer of justice, of fairness, of what was right. The rabbis ask, why was tzedek repeated, tzedek, tzedek? Because it is an ongoing commitment, tirdof, to chase after, to continue, because we never get to a point clearly where we have achieved ultimately our goal. Carole understood this and lived a life pursuing justice in her relationships, in her courtroom, in her community. And so in this time of both grief and of celebration of her life, we turn to the words of the psalmist from Psalm 23, the shepherd psalm, which brings us the message of comfort, teaches us of God's nearness to us in light as in darkness, in joy as in sorrow, in life as in death.
Adonai roi lo echzar binot deshe harbitzeni amei menuchot almei nafshi shovev yeshovev yancheni v'magelei tzedek yancheni v'magelei tzedek leman shemo gam ki Shulchan naged zorerai, die Shantov Shemen Roshi, Kosir Revaya. Ach, tov v'chesed yirtifuni, koyemei chayai, Beshavti bevit Adonai leorach yamim. Adonai roi lo echzar. Adonai roi lo echzar.
The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me lie down in green pastures. He restoreth my soul. He guideth me in straight paths for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. Thou hast anointed my head with oil. My cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord forever. In his sorrow, Job cried out, Adonai natan v'Adonai lakach, yehi shem Adonai mevorach. God has given and God has taken away. Blessed be the name of God. In ancient people, we are well acquainted with grief in the valley of shadows. Death and sorrow are not strangers to us, yet the centuries have taught us that a good name endures beyond the grave, and that there is strength in faith. With Job, we say, Adonai natan, God, you have given. You gave us a loved one, Carole Bellows, who will not be forgotten. For all that was good and enduring in her life, we offer the deepest thanks of our hearts. Adonai lakach, God, you have taken away. We pray for the strength to turn our broken hearts into an altar of trust before which we acknowledge your sovereignty and your love, as we now say, Yehi Shem Adonai Mevorach. Blessed be the name of God, now and forever. Amen. We invite you to take these next few moments to call forward the cherished memories that you have of Carole's life and how her love touched each of our hearts in this moment of silent reflection.
The Honorable Carole Bellows was a woman of great strength and perseverance. We will hear a lot more about that from her loved ones. But she also loved Frank Sinatra. And so it seemed appropriate that for a woman who was such a trailblazer, who was so committed to doing things her way and opening doors for others and making sure that that she kept moving forward along life's highway and that she brought others with her, that My Way seemed like the appropriate song. And if you know it, sing along. And now the end is near, and so I face the final curtain. My friend, I'll say it clear, I'll state my case, of which I'm certain. I've lived a life that's full. I traveled each and every highway, and more, much more than this, I did it my way. Regrets, I've had a few, but then again, too few to mention. I did what I had to do and saw it through without exemption. I planned each chartered course, each careful step along the byway, and more, much more than this, I did it my way. Yes, there were times, I'm sure you knew, when I bit off more than I could chew. But through it all, when there was doubt, I ate it up and spit it out. I faced it all, and I stood tall and did it my way. I've loved, I've laughed and cried, I've had my fill, my share of losing, and now, as tears subside, I find it all so amusing to think I did all that, and may I say, not in a shy way, oh no, not me, I did it my way.
It is so fitting that we continue this tribute of love and celebration of Carole's life with the words of her family. We'll hear first from her son-in-law, Alan, and then her brother, Malcolm, grandson, Arthur, her brother, Chet, and then her daughter, Marcia.
Thank you, Rabbi, and thank you, Cantor. I don't know how I'm going to top that. Looking at the crowd, it's just seeing so many familiar faces. It's just so humbling. On behalf of our family, I'd like to thank you all for being here and for the love and support you've surrounded us this past week. It has meant more to us than I can put into words. As you know, Carole was very humble. I don't think she would have sang the song exactly like that, although I do think that it really does express her spirit and her accomplishments. She didn't like to dwell on her accomplishments. She never liked speeches about herself. And when accepting awards, of which she received many, she would never talk about herself, but instead, she would talk about women lawyers who she said were her heroes. When we planned her 90th birthday, and I see so many of the faces here of people who were there, she was adamant that there be no speeches. She didn't want anybody talking about what she did. She wanted to spend time with her friends, with her loved ones, and didn't want to hear about what she had done. Well, the extraordinary accomplishments of an extraordinary woman deserve to be recounted. And so, there be no doubt, I want to make it clear that Carole was my hero. Now, I'm sure she'll forgive me for what I'm going to say because she had a kind soul, but as a lawyer, I know that truth is an absolute defense. Carole was born on May 24, 1935, in Chicago, the first child of Sarah and Alfred Kamin. She was born before the Second World War. She was born in the midst of the Depression. Her father was a prominent labor lawyer who later became a law professor. Her mother was also a lawyer who practiced a bit and community-spirited, like Carole would be, was involved with the League of Women Voters. At first, they lived on the south side of Chicago, and then when Carole was 6, in 1941, they moved to Skokie in the Evanston School District. Although she was born at the end of the Depression, her father was doing well, and they moved into a nice big house in a nice neighborhood. There were lots of kids around, lots of open spaces to play, to ride bikes, to skate. And Carole was a bit of a tomboy, but at that time, there were no sports leagues for girls. Girls couldn't play on boys' teams. That didn't happen. But Carole loved to swim, and she swam at the Y. And in fact, at that point in time, as when she got to high school, there were no intercollegiate sports for girls, and in fact, it was unlawful under Illinois law. As a girl, she loved to read. The Oz books were her favorite books. She read them multiple times as a child. The books meant so much to her that she kept the full set of books all her life. As many of you know, she continued to be a voracious reader. The rest of her life, she read all kinds of books, found inspiration in biographies, and she had 1,500 books on her Kindle that she had read, and her house is like a library, just stacked, full of books. Carole remembered the war years, and it affected her. She remembered her uncles being away, the rationing, and the patriotism. And she vividly remembered and recounted many times that when she was 10 years old and the war ended, that she stood on the sidewalk with a pot and a metal spoon, and she banged the spoon in celebration. The love of her country stayed with her for the rest of her life. Now, Carole was a big sister to her two younger brothers. We'll hear from both of them today. She was a loving and protective and a very, very bossy big sister. And needless to say, that didn't end when they were kids, but continued through her whole life. Now, Carole's parents, and I'm sure many of you have heard her talk about this, gave their children something unusual and something extraordinarily invaluable: the freedom to direct their own lives. Carole was left to figure things out on her own. Carole's parents expected her to do well in school and to treat everyone, regardless of their status, their class, or their gender, equally and with respect. But they offered very little direction and almost no limits. If it was cold out, her parents wouldn't tell her to wear a coat. And if it was raining, it was up to Carole to figure out whether to wear a raincoat or to carry an umbrella. Carole once asked her parents when she was a child why she wasn't going to camp like all the other kids in the neighborhood. And her mother told her it was because she hadn't signed herself up for camp. So Carole's parents forced her to figure things out on her own, and she did. And like Dorothy from the Oz books, she became self-directed, self-reliant, and fearless, absolutely fearless. She learned to trust herself, to solve her own problems, to make her own magic, and not to second-guess herself. Never met somebody who was so secure as she was. During high school, two things happened that played an important part in her life. The first was getting her driver's license when she was 15 years old. She called it the turning point in her life, and it was the beginning of the independence that she zealously guarded all the way to the end. She loved driving, and she loved cars, and always the optimist. She bought a new car just a few weeks ago, right before she died. And given that she drove everywhere, I thought it was crazily ironic that in the 80s, Metra hired her, and she did a commercial for Metra where I'm sure some of you remember this, where she sat on a train, looked out the window where there was traffic, and she pointed at it and said, "That's crazy." The second event was when she was 18. She got her first real job. And as she recounted in an interview, and I'm going to use her words, not mine, quote, "I was a good swimmer, so I became a lifeguard at Wilmette Beach. And in 1953, there was still a leftover from the war. So there were all women lifeguards at Wilmette Beach. Now, this is a very important part of my life. I love the beach, and so I became part of an all-women lifeguard crew on a very large beach on the North Shore. We had to row the boats, and we had to guard the beach. And we worked 6 days a week, 9 hours a day, and we made $190 a month. But this was my first real job. And of course, it got me to my favorite place in the world, which at the time was the beach. So I certainly kept up my swimming and my rowing, and that was very unusual in the 1950s. Now, being a lifeguard had its advantages. Carole also recalled that the lifeguards had a, quote, very big social life, close quote. And that's also something that Carole kept up for her life, as all of you know, and I see so many people here who she socialized with at the East Bank Club, and otherwise she always had a big social life. Could never understand how she could possibly keep up with half the things that she did. But the following year, after she was worked at the Wilmette Park District, she wasn't invited back. The Park District fired all of the women lifeguards and replaced them with men. Soon after, there was a drowning on the beach. Carole thought it was because the men weren't as attentive to the children as the women lifeguards were. But in any event, Carole never forgot it. The unfairness stayed with her, and it helped form the quiet determination that she had to eliminate unfairness and discrimination that defined her life. The positives from the summer, though, were many. You know, she had lifetime, friends that she met, being a lifeguard, and the acceptance of the responsibility and the pleasure she derived from serving her community and working as a large team member and spending time with a close group of women friends were repeated over and over and over again throughout her life. Now, when she graduated from high school, she went to the University of Illinois, first aiming for pre-med. Then she switched to political science. Now, she was very outgoing. She was fit. She was very attractive. And by all accounts, she had a very active social life and really liked to party. In fact, we're told she really liked it a lot. She was elected to the Student Senate, and she was active in the Independence Women Committee. Carole, though, she really resented the curfews that existed at the college, for women and not for men. She had to be back in her dorm by a certain time every night, but the men did not. She thought the women were treated like children, and this was something that really rankled her because she'd been treated like an adult by her parents from when she was 10 years old, and being told that she had to come in to the dorm by a certain time really bothered her. She also noticed the number of talented female classmates who got married and dropped out of school. She noticed this inequity early, and she never accepted it. Although her parents didn't encourage her to go to law school, apparently the law was in her DNA. Not only did Carole become a lawyer, but so did her two brothers. And all three of the Kamin children married lawyers as well. When Carole graduated from Northwestern Law School in 1960, less than 2% of the 300,000 practicing lawyers in the United States were women. Of the 100 law students in her class, only 3 women graduated in 1960. So even before becoming a lawyer, Carole was forced to learn how to survive, and she learned to thrive in a male-dominated world. The world she graduated into had little place for women at the bar. There were few legal jobs available for women outside of the government. Corporate law firms generally did not hire women, and there were no women partners at large law firms. This, of course, was not because women lacked talent, intellect, or commitment, but simply because the doors had not yet been opened. And Carole spent the next 6 decades opening them, one by one. And she never asked permission. She never looked back to see if anyone was watching. And she never asked for acknowledgement. She was too busy holding the doors open for others. Now, so Joyce will remember this. So although Karen's parents generally took a hands-off approach with her, they were distressed by the series of questionable boyfriends that Carole had at college in the first year of law school. And in 1957, this came to a head when a boyfriend, a hard-drinking newspaper reporter who was like a character out of the movie, The Front Page, came to the family home unexpectedly and highly intoxicated, and insisted in front of her parents that Carole go out with him that night. At the time, Carole's father, Alfred, was co-counsel on a case with Charlie Bellows, a well-known criminal defense lawyer. Alfred learned that Charlie had a single lawyer son named Jason, who was his law partner. The resourceful fathers hatched a plot and arranged for Carole and Jason to meet. Now, there's disagreements as to who brought the documents, but family legend has it that Carole was asked to deliver documents to Bellows and Bellows when only Jason would be there to receive them. Jason took one look at the beautiful Carole Kamin, and he was bewitched. They were married less than a year later, while Carole was still in law school. Jason would remain her partner and steadfast supporter for 22 years until his untimely death in 1980. Jason believed in her at a time when belief in women lawyers themselves was an act of courage. Their partnership as spouses, as parents, as colleagues, as co-architects of a shared legal career was part of the foundation upon which Carole built her extraordinary life. Now, Carole appreciated the matchmaking and paid it forward. She was always looking to match people up and took pride in the large numbers of people that she fixed up that got married. In fact, at the end of her life, she had taken on the self-appointed role of matchmaker for one of her grandsons, a position that is now open. Now, Carole began her legal career working with her father in his firm, because that's what women lawyers were forced to do, work for government or work for family. And in 1961, I mean, think about how long ago we're talking about, 65 years ago. Only a year out of law school, she was appointed by the president of the Illinois State Bar Association to the Bill of Rights Committee for the ISBA. Anybody here who's a member of the ISBA? Thank you for coming. Now, Carole was very active in that committee, and eventually she became its chairperson. And that appointment set in motion half a century of transformative service to the organized bar. Now, after the first of her children, my wife Marcia, who you'll hear from later, was born, Carole took a part-time job as a permanent law clerk to Maurice Perlin, the chief judge of the Illinois Court of Claims. And she would remain in that position for 10 years, during which time she had her two additional children, Doug and Daniel. Now, Carole loved the legal research. She loved writing opinions, which obviously she got to do later in life. And she learned enormously from Judge Perlin and attended all the legal arguments that took place in Chicago. But because it was only a part-time job and with help from her mother, she was able to balance her work schedule with her home life and with her bar work. Decades before magazine writers and trad wives in reality TV shows were questioning whether it was possible for a woman to, quote, have it all, close quote, both a high-powered career and a family life. Carole had one. She figured it out on her own. Now, Marcia will talk a little bit later about what it was like to have Carole as a mother, so I'm not going to get into that here. I'm going to talk more about some of the bar things. But Carole, with her keen intellect, her strong leadership skills, her amazing political skills, her abundant charm, her charisma, and most importantly, her ability to get along with just about anyone, but mostly from her hard work and knowing how to navigate a cocktail party, which was a prerequisite in the 60s male world. Carole thrived in the male-dominated world of the organized bar of the 1960s. She developed lifelong close friendships with a large number of the lawyers she met at the various bar associations and conventions. Carole was well aware from her time as a lifeguard and otherwise about the discrimination that existed in Illinois. Gender discrimination, racial discrimination, and the difficulties that people were having with employment discrimination, and also, that people wouldn't, rent, apartments or sell homes, to minorities and to women. Carole put it to practice with her Bill of Rights Committee, and she was particularly proud of the work of her committee that proposed language that was ultimately incorporated into the Illinois Constitution in 1970, where her brother Malcolm was a delegate. And in that language, in our Constitution here in Illinois, it banned discrimination on the basis of gender, race, color, creed, or national ancestry in the hiring or promotion of employees or in the sale or rental of property. And Carole thought that was really important and was really meaningful to her. And she understood how well done bar association work could influence the legislative process and bring about real social change in the city that she loved, the state that she loved, and the country that she loved. And over 55 years ago, in 1969, Carole became the first woman elected to the Board of Governors of the Illinois State Bar Association. In 1977, almost 50 years ago, she made history again when she was elected president of the Illinois State Bar Association, the first woman in the United States to be elected president of a state bar association. Let's just pause for a second. Not the first woman in Illinois, not the first woman in the Midwest, but the first woman anywhere in the country to lead a state bar association. And she did it by working hard and earning the trust and respect of her male peers. And it's even more incredible, the feat, when you consider that there wasn't another woman president of the ISBA for over 20 more years, and that in other similar states to Illinois, like New York, there wasn't the first elected president of their state bar association for another 10 years. You know, after all her achievements in the state bar, Carole took it national. In 1978, she became the first woman state delegate elected to the American Bar Association House of Delegates. 50 men, 49 men, Carole, and a woman and a representative from the Women's Bar Association on the board of delegates. And she also later became the first woman to chair the Fellows of the American Bar Association. And her work at the Bar Association at the ABA wasn't just political. She was a founding member of what is now the Section of Civil Rights and Social Justice and became its chairperson in 1975, a section that played a significant role in influencing civil rights reforms across the country in the late 60s and the early 70s. But of course, there were disappointments as well. Carole worked tirelessly for ratification of the Equal Rights Amendment. She believed that a constitutional guarantee of equality for women was demanded by justice and decency. Her efforts and the efforts of thousands of others ended in disappointment when the ERA failed to be ratified by just three states, including the state of Illinois, where she debated Phyllis Schlafly, the leader of the opposition to the ERA. And although Carole was the first woman to run for president of the ABA for the 1986 term, she lost in a close election. But she was never bitter about any of these defeats, just the opposite. They inspired her, and her campaign to be president of the ABA opened the door for other women to run successfully years later. When Carole's youngest son went to kindergarten, Carole left the clerkship and started working full-time alongside her husband and father-in-law, Bellows and Bellows. At the firm, Carole did it her way. She didn't commit herself to working on the criminal cases that they were doing, but instead she took on a full load of discrimination cases, and she was very proud of the precedent that she created, including a case that went to the US Supreme Court on fundamental discrimination laws. As I noted earlier, in 1980, Carole's beloved husband Jason died after a long illness. The heartache came soon after the death of her father-in-law, Charlie Bellows. And during that time of great pain, Carole was outwardly incredibly supportive for her 3 kids, while she had to reinvent herself as the breadwinner of her family. Shortly after Jason's death, Carole became a partner at the prestigious Chicago law firm of Rubin and Proctor, and there she got her first interest in family law. See some Rubin and Proctor people here today, and it's humbling that you would join us. And right around the same time, in 1980, she became one of the original members of the East Bank Club. So how many East Bank Club members we have here today? And as all of you know, the East Bank Club became a huge part of her social life. Carole got in the routine of getting up every morning at 5 a.m. and driving into the city, parking at the East Bank Club, working out or swimming, and on some days both, and then having breakfast with her many friends at the club, and then going to the office. And she did this every business day for almost 40 years. Needless to say, she was in great shape, and she pushed everyone who wasn't in great shape to go to the club to get fit. And then, of course, came, the coup de grace in her life, the bench. 1986, the Supreme Court of Illinois appointed her to be a judge on the Cook County Circuit Court. The presiding judge of the Domestic Relations Division requested that she be assigned there, allowing her to skip having to start her judicial career in the traffic courts. She then served in the Domestic Relations Division for 32 years without interruption, including as the presiding judge of the division, retiring in 2018. 32 years. Think of how many families walked into her courtroom in the worst moments of their lives, frightened, exhausted, angry, heartbroken, and they encountered Carole, a judge who refused to let the worst of human circumstances bring out the worst of human behavior. Lawyers and litigants who appeared before her remember her unfailing patience, her practical wisdom, and her steady insistence that even the most contentious family matters be handled with dignity and respect, particularly when children were involved. How many current or former judges on the circuit court are here today? Wow. Wow, what a testament. Thank you for coming. She loved her colleagues. Especially her fellow judges. She loved her job. She loved the ability to provide equal justice with dignity and respect. She felt that it was a privilege to be able to serve her community. During her years on the bench, she was a role model, a champion, a cheerleader, a mentor for female and minority lawyers and judges. Many of you have reached out to us over the last week with your stories of her kindness, and I tell you, your notes have warmed our hearts. After joining the bench, Carole had lots of opportunities to either make more money or to have a more prestigious position, in the judicial system. She was asked if she would be interested in being on the Court of Appeals or the Illinois Supreme Court. She turned all these things down. She was not interested in money. She wasn't interested in prestige. What was important to her was helping people. And she knew that the seat she had gave her the best opportunity to do that. After going on the bench, Carole retired from bar activities, and this gave her another opportunity that she seized. She now had time to travel with her friends, to focus on her grandchildren and her children and her nieces and her nephews and her cousins. And boy, did she love her kids and her grandkids. She was their biggest supporters, their biggest cheerleaders. She reveled in her trips with them to London, to Disney World, to Washington, D.C., to Puerto Rico, to San Francisco, to Miami. And as busy as she was always present for her family, in good times and in bad, always offering support, encouragement, and help. She was the glue that held together our family. Her optimism, kindness, generosity, the way she treated people set the standard that everyone in the family tries to live up to. Now, Marcia and I got married in 1989. I'm sorry, 1989. I don't know, today it feels like 1969, but 1989. And Carole always treated me like a son, and she always treated my family as her family. And for that, I'm eternally grateful. And she got so embedded in my family that she knew more about what was going on with my nieces and nephews on my side than Marcia and I did. And probably some of you did as well, because I'm sure she told you. But at one point, I asked her, how is it possible that you could know all of this? And I was astonished to hear, although I probably shouldn't have been, that she was on the brilliant Siegel family chat that didn't include either me or my wife. Now, my nieces and nephews, called her, Grandma Carole, and they thought of her as their grandmother as well. And they all flew in today to be here today from all across the country to honor her. Now, when our son Jason was born, Marcia and I still lived in Chicago, and I tend to work late. And after finishing up at the court, Carole would stop by the house on her way home, and she would have dinner with Marcia and help with the baby. And not wanting to intrude in our marriage, Carole would time her visits to be gone, before I got home. And I cannot tell you how many nights that I pulled up in front of our townhouse in a cab, and Carol's car was pulling out just as I was getting there. Just another example of how considerate that she always was. And as I've been telling my son for years, his grandma was the real deal. She made a huge difference in thousands of lives. She had a long, happy, meaningful life, a life full of love, a life full of laughter. She loved a good party, and life was full of them. She lived every day fully, purposefully, and with extraordinary consequence. She loved what she did, and she did what she loved, and the people who were at the court with her know she loved all the people she did it with. She lived her life on her terms. She did it her way, to the very end. She managed to find and maintain the perfect balance for her between work and family and public service. She was loved by many and respected by all who knew her. She had as many adventures and challenges as Dorothy did in the Land of Oz. Health challenges, the death of her husband, and other issues that would have stopped other people. But like Dorothy, she never gave up and always found a way to help the people she loved. And like Dorothy, she acquired many friends on her magical journey. And everyone who went with her on her journey with her was better for having known her. And Carole knew that there was no place like home. She loved Chicago. She loved the house that she had lived in for 65 years. She didn't need to click the heels of ruby red slippers to return home because she never left. There was no way she was ever going to leave the city she loved or her home. 2002, Carole cut out an Ann Landers advice column, which contained a definition of success written by Bessie Anderson Stanley in 1904. Carole kept it with her papers for 24 years. Don't know why. Don't know if it was a standard she was trying to live up to, or if she just liked it, but she cut it out of the Tribune, and she kept it. I changed the gender references. I don't need to tell you, in 1904, women weren't referenced. But it goes with the modifications I made. She has achieved success who has lived well, laughed often, and loved much, who has enjoyed the trust of pure women, the respect of intelligent men, and the love of little children, who has filled her niche and accomplished her task, who has left the world better than she found it, whether by an improved poppy, a perfect poem, or a rescued soul, who has never lacked appreciation for Earth's beauty or failed to express it, who has always looked for the best in others and given them the best she had, whose life was an inspiration and whose memory a benediction. Under this definition or any other one, Carole's life was an enormous success. Thank you for coming today to celebrate it. And thank you for sharing her magical journey with her. May her life and accomplishments inspire you to do great things, and may her memory be a blessing.
It's hard to believe that as I stand here, it was 43 years ago we were here doing a memorial service for my mother. And at that point in time, the tradition had it that the members of the family were not allowed to speak. And I'm not sure when the tradition changed, but I think it's changed for the better because you get the real story. Ellen has given us a beautiful and heartfelt tribute to the amazing woman that Carole was. It's my task to fill in a few details of the backstory. I think Carole's inherent sense of justice and her abhorrence of injustice stems from an incident that I do not remember, but was told as family folklore. Apparently, I started to walk at about 9 months of age. When I was not much over 1, Carole was assigned to watch me in my playpen in the backyard of the apartment that we lived in at 76th and Essex Avenue in the South Shore. As an aside, here's another example of our mother's commitment to the Droiker's view that children learn best by being treated as adults. Who but our mother would have thought it perfectly reasonable to put a 5-year-old in charge of watching out for the safety of a 1-year-old for several hours without any adult oversight? In any event, I was precocious enough to have figured out how to open my playpen and was discovered walking in the alley behind our apartment building. Carole was severely reprimanded for having let me out of my playpen. She was only forgiven some days later when I demonstrated that I really could open the playpen by myself. I think that the unfairness she perceived from her wrongful chastisement never left her, because she repeated this story frequently when we were growing up. As I said, I am sure this experience contributed to her strong commitment to the idea that people deserve to be treated fairly and justly, not only in a courtroom setting, but in a discrimination-free society generally. Carole was also really smart. In 6th grade, she received some kind of award for being the best science student in Evanston. I think this is what shaped the idea that she would study science and become a doctor. She wanted to go to the University of Illinois because at the time, it had a national reputation for excellence in pre-med studies. The family was totally but pleasantly surprised when she declared that she had decided to drop medicine and go to law school at the end of her sophomore year at Illinois. I think it had to do with her involvement in student government and, reflecting what I said before, a belief that she could do more to improve society as a lawyer than as a doctor. Everything Carole did, she did with energy and enthusiasm. Few people know that as a young girl, she adored Sonja Henie. And I remember her insisting that the family go to a Sonja Henie ice show that toured Chicago in the 1940s. She also spent several preteen years taking horseback riding lessons at the School of Horsemanship, which was located where the Holocaust Museum now is. Those interests sort of went by the wayside when she started swimming. She really loved to swim, and her greatest frustration with the afflictions of the past few years were when they were serious enough to interfere with her morning swims at the East Bank Club. But as Alan said, even when she couldn't swim, as long as she could drive, she would make it to her breakfast table at the EBC, where she could count on the camaraderie of a rotating group of club regulars that she had befriended over the years, as those who've raised their hands, several of whom are with us now. Now, when Alan said that Carole loved a good party, those who knew Carole in later life may not fully realize what this meant. I think it started with our cousin, Norman Zimmerman, who was a few years older than Carole and had enrolled at Purdue. He had a girlfriend who was still in high school. The girlfriend's mother was reluctant to let her daughter go off to Purdue for a party weekend, so Norman persuaded Carole to come along as a sort of chaperone. All I remember is that Carole came back extolling the virtues of purple passions, a drink made by adding vodka to grape juice. During the next couple of years, she made a number of trips to Purdue. And by her telling, drank a lot of Purple Passions. The partying really increased during our summers at Wilmette Beach. Our house hosted numerous parties for her lifeguard friends and an assorted group of waywards who hung out at the beach. She hosted one memorable party while Chet and I were traveling with our parents to the ABA meeting in Boston in the summer of 1953. It turned into what we might call a teen takeover today. Apparently, the police were called to disperse a crowd of about 100 rowdies spilling out into our front and backyards, whose noise, needless to say, disturbed the neighbors. I'm guessing in hindsight that it didn't hurt that our father had just completed a term as Justice of the Peace in Niles Township and was well known to the Skokie police from traffic court. So nothing more became of the incident. That didn't end her beer parties at our house, but the number of guests at later ones were more limited and controlled. That said, Carole loved to drink and party throughout college. One of her favorite destinations was the now defunct Tip Top Tap atop the Allerton Hotel. And rumor has it that despite consuming large quantities of alcohol, she was never taken advantage of because she could easily outdrink her dates. Trying to keep up with her, they became too inebriated to be able to do much of anything, while she remained in total control of herself. Curiously, this partying came to a virtual stop when she met Jason. Jason was unlike any of her string of dates and short-term boyfriends, who were more of the hard-drinking party types. Apart from his own brilliance and erudition, I think what attracted Carole to Jason most was that he had a subtle but sharp wit and could make her laugh. As anyone who has ever dined or lunched with, or had breakfast with Carole knows, Carole loved a good joke and loved to laugh. Best of all, she was perfectly capable of laughing at herself when she did something silly. She loved passing on the jokes that circulated on the internet and sharing them, particularly with her lunch friends. Now, I was privileged to be able to join her and her gang of judges at least once a week for many years, as they recounted all the crazy things that happened in their courtrooms. After she had been on the bench for about 20 years, a curmudgeonly lawyer named George Fywell, who the judges and family law lawyers here know well, said to me, "Why is your sister still sitting? She could take her full pension and make money mediating." I replied, "She'd miss the gossip." When I told this to Carole, she said I was right. She loved the life she had on the bench and her relationship with her colleagues, and did not want to change it. One more story about Carole's dedication to justice. A number of years ago, the attorney for a litigant who did not speak English asserted that the court had an obligation not only to provide a translator for her testimony, but had an obligation to provide a translation of the final judgment in the party's native language. Now, I imagine that most judges would just reject such a claim out of hand, but that was not good enough for Carole. She wanted to research the law and find out why. She was only satisfied denying the request when she found a Supreme Court case from the early 1900s, holding that under the transition schedule of the 1870 Constitution, English was declared the official language of Illinois. Thus, she concluded that court records need only be written in English. As another aside, the transition schedule of the 1970 Constitution says that no existing law is changed by the 1970 Constitution unless specifically addressed. So I think that English is still the official language of the state of Illinois. I'm guessing that the delegates to the 1870 Constitution stuck this language in the transition schedule because no one ever reads it when they're voting on the adoption of the body of the Constitution. And it would have outraged the large immigrant community if they had ever had this called to their attention. I'll close with another story that bears upon a mystery to many as to why someone as beautiful and loving as Carole never found someone to remarry after Jason died. I did not witness this occurrence, but Carole related it with great humor. Maybe 2 or 3 years after Jason's death, Carole did consent to be fixed up with someone who looked like a potential suitor in the eyes of whomever fixed them up. He was a successful doctor at Evanston Hospital. Her first date was as his guest to the annual dinner for the staff and the board of the hospital. On the drive over in a very fancy new car, the doctor told Carole all about himself, his successful practice, and the various sports at which he excelled, never asking her anything about herself. When they got to the party, the first person they ran into was the internist who had taken care of our parents and had been a good friend of the family for about 25 years. He was a well-regarded senior member of the staff. Needless to say, he greeted Carole with a, "Carole, what are you doing here?" and a warm hug and a kiss. She also received warm welcomes from a number of other doctors who were the fathers of some of the girls she had grown up with. To cap it off, Bert Jenner, who was on the board of directors, greeted her with a big hug and a kiss. For you out-of-towners and younger people, Bert Jenner was the head of one of the Chicago's best-known law firms and a past president of the Illinois Bar Association himself. When the doctor took her home, I'm guessing around 10 o'clock, she noticed her answering machine blinking and excused herself to play it. It was a message from Seymour Simon asking her to call him whatever time she got home. For those of you who don't know, Seymour was a well-known politician, had been a Chicago alderman, president of the Cook County Board, and ultimately an Illinois Supreme Court justice. She immediately called Seymour, who had some political concern, and all the doctor could hear was Carole giving Seymour advice about various people he could talk to about whatever it was that concerned him. When she was done, she apologized to the doctor, saying something to the effect that Seymour Simon really wanted to talk to me and I couldn't ignore him. The doctor said something to the effect of, "You really seem to be somebody. Who are you?" Carole then finally told him of her background and some of her accomplishments, I'm sure quite modestly. Despite what seemed to be a pleasant evening, she never heard from him again. Obviously, he was of the generation whose manhood was threatened by successful women, and she never dipped her toes in the dating waters after that. So, yes, as the doctor surmised, Carole really was somebody. Somebody who will be long remembered with deep love and affection by all her family and those who knew her well. Somebody who will also be remembered with great admiration and respect by everyone who knows or learns of her story. Thank you all for coming.
For those of you who do not know me, I'm Arthur Bellows, one of Carole's grandsons. My grandmother was without question the nicest and kindest person I've ever had the pleasure of knowing. The compassion she had for others was extensive. I never once had to doubt the love she had for me. When I was a little boy, one of our routines on many Sundays was to go out to lunch at California Pizza Kitchen while she would tell me a toned-down version of that week's gossip. As I got older, that routine became less frequent, but the time I spent with her grew. I chose to spend time with her whenever I could. Looking back, many of my memories were not grand or dramatic. Most were ordinary moments, like going out to lunch or walking around the botanical gardens. You may wonder what it was like to be Carole's grandson. Part of that privilege was the honor of being her on-call technology advisor. I genuinely enjoyed being her advisor, and I think I taught her enough over the years that she became more technologically advanced than many of others. But more importantly, it was another opportunity to spend time with her. I do not know if anyone ever realized this, but whenever there was a choice of where to sit when I was with my grandmother, I almost always found my way to the seat next to her. That wasn't an accident, it was a well-developed strategy. I wanted to sit next to her, I wanted to talk to her, and I wanted to spend time with her. As I got older, I would constantly talk to her on the phone. On many occasions, multiple times a day. No matter what was going on, I always enjoyed talking to her. One of the things I have more recently thought is that my grandmother should have written a book. She lived such a long and incredible life and touched so many people and had so much wisdom and so many interesting experiences that I believe she could have filled volumes. But the funny thing is that she never would have done it. She was far too humble. She never saw herself the way most saw her. She was the strongest person I have ever known. She never gave up. She worked until she was 83 years old because she loved what she did, and even after retirement, she went to the infamous East Bank Club. Many people knew her as a judge, and I was fortunate enough to see her on the bench a few times. But even more than that, she was my grandmother. What I'll remember most is not her accomplishments, it was who she was to me and the rest of her family. She was kind, humble, and very generous. She made ordinary moments feel simply special simply because she was there. I feel incredibly fortunate that she was my grandmother. I will miss her deeply, and may her blessing be a memory.
That was really lovely, Arthur. Thank you. I'm Chet Kamin, Carole's younger brother, and boy, I felt that a lot at times. The Cambridge Online Dictionary defines lunch as a meal that is eaten in the middle of the day. Today, I'd like to offer another definition. Lunch is a midday meal eaten with your siblings. And Carole and Mal and I had lunch regularly, about once a month. I traveled a lot, and I probably missed more of those lunches than Mal did. but we got together frequently. We had favorite places. We went to the Renaissance Hotel, the second floor looking out over the river at State and Wacker. We went to Petterino's when it was open and very close to Carol's Court. Every once in a while she'd get a craving to go to Greek Islands, and so we would tootle over to the west side to Greek Islands. And then after she retired and she was coming down to the East Bank Club, on Mondays and Fridays, we would meet for lunch at the East Bank Club. We loved being with each other. How lucky we were. We never missed a birthday. For at least 40 years, the three of us would have, sometimes joined by other family members, would have a birthday lunch, and the one whose birthday it would be treated by the others. Our tradition was no gifts, but an exchange of birthday cards. The birthday cards were of questionable taste. Sometimes they made noises. I won't give examples, but you can use your imaginations. We talked about anything and everything. We were very candid and open with each other. If there were problems in the family, we talked about those. If there were successes and things to celebrate, we talked about that. We just talked about everything, and we laughed a lot. Everyone has talked about how much Carole loved to laugh. We always talked about our children and our grandchildren. Again, you see the common theme here. Carole loved her family, not only her children and grandchildren, her nieces and nephews, and great nieces and nephews, and she just loved people and loved life. She was fiercely protective of her family. She was fiercely protective of anybody that she was close to. We talked about what we were reading. Alan mentioned Carole as a voracious reader. She was a voracious reader. And she loved talking about that. We talked about FDR and Alexander Hamilton and Mark Twain. And she loved the stories that exhibited the quirks of famous people. We talked about the law. We talked about our cases. We talked about successes and failures, legal issues. Carole was very successful on the bench, but when she first went on the bench, there were a few lawyers who, seeing what a wonderful person she was, thought that they could bully her. As you could guess, they were all men. And Carole would tell us at lunch, with some regret, but maybe also some satisfaction, about some egregious behavior, and she said, "I had to threaten to lock him up." But after that, he behaved. After a few years, those stories kind of stopped. I think people who practiced before her got the point. Mel mentioned her judicial college. We often talked about her judicial colleagues. Sometimes I was present at these lunches with the judges. We talked about politics, local, state, and national. All of us had been politically active at one time or another. And we knew some of the personalities involved. And Frankly, we did gossip about a lot of it. Carole loved a great story, and she loved being in the know. In the last few years, sadly, we talked about doctors and health and issues like that. Last February, Carole arranged a special birthday lunch at the Capitol Grill, and some of you who are up here know the Capitol Grill does a really fancy, involved lunch service. She was very proud that she had been able to reserve it for Mal's birthday. Capitol Grill's not too far from her home. I offered to pick her up. Despite the fact that she had seriously broken leg and surgery and was not in the greatest shape, she said, no, I'll drive myself. And she did. We never had a lunch I'm not going to get through this, for Carole's birthday, which was 2 weeks ago today. Mal and I will go on having lunch as long as we're able. Carole will always be there with us.
Good morning. I'd like to thank you all for being here to celebrate my mother's life, especially those who flew in from out of town. And thank you to all who gave expressions of condolences and love. These are just some recollections that I had as Carole's daughter. So, what was it like to have Carole Bellows as a mom? When Doc, Dan, and I were young in the 60s and early 70s, it was very unusual to have a mother who worked outside the home, nonetheless one who was a lawyer. Our family definitely stood out in the neighborhood, but I was always proud to have a mom who was a lawyer and who had an interesting life. My mother was stunningly beautiful. I again took pride in having the prettiest mom in the neighborhood. She was charismatic and energetic even at home. She was engaged with everything we did, such as supporting my brother who played baseball, to supporting me when I did children's community theater, lots of shows. She effortlessly juggled work life and home life with her bar activities. Although we did regularly have dinner at the Walker Brothers Pancake House in Wilmette. In the early 70s, my mother transitioned from doing part-time work for a judge to working full-time at the family law firm Bellows and Bellows. The law firm was located in the IBM building downtown. As kids, we often visited the office, and we were treated as honored guests every time. Also at that time, all of our summer vacations were based upon whatever the American Bar Association was holding their annual convention. I remember a trip to Hawaii as well as lengthy car trips to Montreal and Atlanta, and my very first trip to New York City and San Francisco when I was in college. At those conventions, my mother showed pride in her children and went out of her way to introduce us to star attorneys. I still remember being introduced to Ruth Bader Ginsburg, but before she was on the Supreme Court. In 1979 and 80, we lost my grandfather and then father to illness. I believe that this was a very difficult time for my mother, but she presented a serene and stable front. My grandmother Hazel had lost both her husband and son, and my mom cared for her as she would her own mother. She was truly a daughter to Hazel. Around 1979, my mother became a partner at the law firm of Rubin and Proctor. She arranged summer jobs for us to work at the firm. In 1981, upon my return from a DC summer internship, my mom announced that she had joined a new one-of-a-kind health club called the East Bank Club. She loved to swim and immediately had a schedule of early morning workouts. She thought exercise was important and that everyone should partake. She was always interested in other people's workouts and wanted to hear about them. One college summer, I lived at home and worked at the law firm. If I wanted a ride downtown, I would have to wake at 5 a.m. to drive with my mom to the East Bank Club, theoretically to work out. My mom recruited 2 other young women friends to come with us, and we picked them up along the way to the club. Upon arrival, my one friend, who I think is here, Benetta Kelly, my one friend and I would skip the workout and immediately go to the napping rooms to get more sleep. My mom was none the wiser. I think my mom was dismayed when Alan, Jason, and I moved to New York City 26 years ago, but she quickly got into the groove. She visited every summer for Jason's birthday, and we all had a great time with her. Each summer, she and I would visit MoMA and have lunch at the museum's fine dining restaurant. And she loved the many Broadway shows that we saw, such as Hello, Dolly with Bette Midler, or The Music Man with Hugh Jackman. It was also great to have her company when she traveled with us to Puerto Rico or Florida in the winter. She definitely graded the hotels based on whether or not the pools had good lap lanes for swimming. Her trips to New York also included spending time at our house at the Jersey Shore. I think she really liked the energetic jive of the Jersey Shore, and she loved socializing and swimming in the pool at our beach club. This is a pool filled with buoyant salt water and with luxurious long swimming lanes. Last summer, we each had a lane and swam together at the same time. I know my mother was hoping to visit us this summer. I will especially feel her presence every time I swim in that pool. In sum, my mother was a one-of-a-kind person. Beautiful, smart, kind, self-assured, charismatic, and empathetic. I will cherish the memories. Thanks.
I prepared about another hour's worth of tribute to Carole. I'm going to put that aside and simply return to the verse from Deuteronomy with which I began this morning. Tzedek, tzedek tirdof. Justice, justice shalt thou pursue. Carole was an ardent pursuer of justice. She saw it as her purpose and her life's work, as you have heard so beautifully from her family, to make the world a better place for her having been in it. And truly, the world is a better place for having Carole Bellows in it, and that it is up to us to continue that work that she understood as so important, tikkun olam, of finding the broken parts of our world and doing what we can to fix them. She once remarked and shared with her family that being a judge in her court was the best position that a Jewish grandmother could ever have because she got to tell total strangers how to best take care of their own children. And that was a hallmark of her life, seeing what was broken and doing her best to fix it. There is another verse from the rabbinic literature that goes as follows: Aseh lecha rav uknei lecha chaver. Make for yourself a teacher, acquire for yourself a friend. I am certain that all of you who have gathered here this morning and this afternoon to pay tribute to her life count her as both a teacher and as a friend. May her memory continue to be a blessing to all whose lives she touched, to all who loved her, all who will miss her, and all who will carry on her work into the future. Amen. We continue with the memorial prayer, El Malei Rachamim. Please rise as you are able.
El Malei Rachamim, Shochen Bamromim, Hametzei Menucha Nechona Tachat Kanvei Hashchina, Im Kedoshim Utoharim, Kizohar Harakia Mazhirim, Linishmat Yakirenu Shalach Lolama, Baal Harachamim Yastireha, Beseter Kenafav Lolamim, Bitzror Achayim Et Nishmata, Adonai Hu Nachalata, V'tanuach b'shalom al mishkava, v'nomar
Compassionate God, eternal Spirit of the universe, grant perfect rest in your sheltering presence to Carole, Kamin, Bellows, who has entered eternity. O God of mercy, let her find refuge in your eternal presence, and let her soul be bound up in the bond of eternal life. God is her inheritance. May she rest in peace. And together we say, Amen. Receive in mercy, O God, the soul of our departed Carole. Grant her that everlasting peace which you have prepared for us in the world to come. Though no human eye has seen, nor ear has heard, nor mind has grasped it, Still, it is our sure inheritance and our everlasting portion. O God, help us to understand that grief and love go hand in hand, that the pain which loss inflicts is the measure of a love stronger than death. Though we cry in the anguish of our hearts, may we be like children who know that their parent is near and who cling unafraid to the trusted hand. In this spirit, O God, do we commit all that is precious to us to your keeping, as we repeat words hallowed by the generations, the words of the mourner's Kaddish, which you can find inserted in the pamphlet you received here at the sanctuary. Yitgadal v'yitkadash shemei Rabbah, bi'alma divra chirute v'amlich malchute, b'chayechon u'v'yomechon, uv'chaye dechol Beit Yisrael, ba'agala u'vizman kariv v'imru amen. Yehi shmei Rabbah mevorach leolam omei omaya. Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitromam v'yitnaseh. V'yitadar v'yitaleh v'yitalal shmei dekudsha b'richu. Le'ela min kol birchata v'shirata. Tushbechata v'nechamata. Da'amiran bi'alma v'imru amen. Yehi shlama Rabbah min Shemaya. V'chayim aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen. Oseh shalom b'mromav, hu ya'aseh shalom, aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen.
Oseh shalom b'mromav, hu ya'aseh shalom. Aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael ve'imeru. Amen.
May the source of peace send peace to all who mourn Carole's passing and bring comfort to all who are bereaved among us. And together once again we say, Amen. The family has asked me, as we bring this memorial service, this tribute of love to Carole's life, to a close, to do so with the sounding of the shofar. Most often we are familiar with the blowing of the shofar at Rosh Hashanah to announce the new year. But the Torah also guides us to understand that it is an instrument that's used as a call to action, as a recognition of an important moment in our lives. And certainly this is a call to action for us, not only in remembering Carole, but remembering the work that she held so dear and which is now ours to continue. Zichrona livracha, may Carole's memory continue to be a blessing. We invite you, please, to remain standing so that we can escort Carole's family into the social hall, where you'll be able to continue to share stories and offer words of comfort to them.